And we definitely have one today. But before we get into that, I do want to welcome up Samuel Carley. He's the Director of Finance and the Controller here at the Cambria Hotel. And the Cambria is a brand new hotel, as you can see. Really, they just opened up about a month ago. Going to have their official opening in just a few weeks. So exciting to be here. I was just saying, I remember when this was all surface lots out this way. So a lot of development that's occurred. So we'll have Samuel come up. Well, you say that? Well, may not. While we wait for someone from the hotel to come up, just talk a little bit about what they've been doing. I'll invite up Sandra Boehmler, who's the Dean of the College of Health and Human Services at Southern Connecticut State University and Chair of our Healthcare and Life Science Council.
Thank you. I just want to thank everyone for being here today. It's just such a pleasure to come together and acknowledge such a critically important topic. It's a personal topic for most of us in the room, as well as for many of you, your professional work. So just to come together and be able to share this moment and get to know one another is very special. And I thank our panelists for taking time this morning. The Life Sciences, the Healthcare and Life Sciences Council is part of the Chamber. We invite you to let us know. We have many of our members here. If you could just stand if you're part of the Council. Thank you so much for your work. Any of those individuals, grab them, tell them what you want us to do programming-wise, and we would do our best to try to address some of those issues. You'll hear about other events that are coming up with the Chamber, and it's just such a wonderful organization to network, get to know people, and help move your professional career. I also want to just say for today, while you're enjoying the presentation, we don't have AV up here, so I'm going to ask all of us to yell or speak or project. And then you have yellow sheets of paper on your table. If you have a question that comes up, Patty, raise your hand, is going to come around and collect those and bring them up to Dr. Weiner, who's going to be moderating. So again, thank you for being here. Please keep an eye out and join us for more programs as the year goes along. Thanks.
Thanks, Sandy. All right, I do want to introduce now Samuel Carley, who's the Director of Finance and the Controller here at the Cambria. Thanks for hosting us.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Wow, great turnout. As you know, welcome to the Cambria. We've been open it'll be 5 weeks tomorrow, and the time has flown by. It's been a great experience for the team, for the city of New Haven, to be able to host events such as this. So we're looking forward to many more events for this room to be filled. But on behalf of me and the team, we just want to welcome you here and hope you have a great time. And please let us know if anybody needs anything. We'll be here for you. Okay? Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. All right, we're going to get started with our topic, and today it's advances and challenges in breast cancer treatment and outcomes. Obviously, this is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I'm going to invite up Dr. Eric Weiner. He is the director of the Yale Cancer Center and physician-in-chief of Smilo Cancer Network here at Yale New Haven Health Network. And Dr. Weiner is going to moderate our panel. I'll let him introduce our other panelists. I just want to say Dr. Weiner came back to New Haven in February to take on this position. He has a long history with our region. And also, before we get started, I want to thank Retreat Behavioral Health, our sponsor of the Healthcare and Life Science Council. So Dr. Weiner, hand it over to you.
How do I do this? Do you want me to bring people up first? Or
Yeah, but everybody.
why don't you all come up? I don't like to
You're
be
in charge now.
I don't like to be by
Face
myself. Okay, we're going to do a little audio check. Can you hear me back there? Oh, okay. So everybody's going to have to project a little bit. I'm going to start standing, but then I'm at some point going to sit. Let me actually first introduce our panelists. I think that would be the best way to do this. So I do have to consult my notes since we've been friends for all of about 15 minutes. But I got some of it memorized pretty well in advance. So first, to my left is Alvaro Menendez, who I realized when he pointed out to me that we had met previously a few years ago when we were talking about jobs in Boston, among other places. And I'm a pretty casual guy, so I'm going to use first names. Alvaro is a medical oncologist, is from El Salvador, went to medical school in El Salvador, and then came to the US where he did training in Providence and then in Indiana. And he is presently focusing on breast cancer at Hartford Healthcare, but is also leading their effort related to healthcare disparities and has been very involved specifically into the Hispanic Latinx, with the Hispanic Latinx community, and again, lots of work, and we'll talk about that, related to healthcare disparities around the country, around the world, and very specifically in the state of Connecticut. Second to my left is Francesca Menghi, who's originally from Italy and came and did a postdoctoral fellowship with someone I knew from years ago. Initially, she was in Singapore doing this work, which is sort of a wonderful and crazy place. You know, one of the few places you can go out for a drink in this thing that looks like a big boat on top of 3 towers, and has, over the past 20 years, focused on laboratory research related to breast cancer, and she will later share with us information about some recent work she's done related to triple-negative breast cancer and what's called BRCA1 associated breast cancer. BRCA1, as many of you may know, is a gene that people inherit and is responsible for breast cancer in probably 2 or 3% of all women who have breast cancer. But we've studied this a great deal over the years, at least partially because we think that it can give us clues into breast cancer and other cancers in general. And finally, to my left is Linda Alderman, who is a patient advocate and you are presently the lead person for the ACS CAN project, which stands for, I looked at this.
Cancer Action Network.
Cancer Action Network, thank you very much, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Linda, of course, has a unique perspective, both because she has faced other illnesses in her life and because she's had breast cancer twice, which she actually described to me as the least of her problems in some ways. But I actually think it makes a very, very important point, which is that breast cancer is, of course, a very, very heterogeneous problem and extends all the way from something that, while emotionally troubling, is not terribly physically threatening, to, of course, an illness that at times and all too frequently takes people's lives. So with that background, let me just spend 1 or 2 minutes telling you sort of where I came from, and then I'm going to talk just a little bit at a pretty high level about breast cancer, and then we're going to move on and ask each of our panelists to talk. So I'm really boring. Because I have lived in all of 3 cities in my entire life. I grew up in Boston. I came here as a very naive 17-year-old freshman in college many years ago, at a time when Yale felt like it both figuratively and literally had walls around it, separating Yale from the community. And I have to say that while not perfect still, it's so very different compared to then. But I stayed here for many years for training and for education and training, ultimately spent 10 years at Duke, and then the last 20 or so years was at Dana-Farber, where I ran the breast cancer program. And I think to give you a sense of what I know and what I don't know, I'll relay a little story from my oldest son, who, when he was about 10, had this rash on his face, sort of an annoying rash. And I kept telling him it was from getting chocolate all over his face. So he goes to the dermatologist. The dermatologist says, your father has no idea what he's talking about. You have perioral dermatitis. Jeffrey comes home, says, "Dad, you're wrong." And I said, I still think it's like you got to be careful with like you just got to eat in a slightly neater way. He said, "Dad, if I had breast cancer on my face, I'd listen to you. Otherwise, I'll listen to the dermatologist." And so I have spent my life really focusing entirely on breast cancer, both in terms of taking care of patients and doing research and building programs. And actually, for the first time in my career, I'm now having to focus on much broader issues, and it's really a pleasure. But my heart is still really about trying to figure out how we're going to do better from a breast cancer standpoint, which is why it's certainly for me a pleasure to be here today. As I mentioned, breast cancer is many, many diseases. When I first started taking care of patients, women, and once in a while men, would say to me, "What kind of breast cancer do I have?" And I'd say, "Well, you have stage 1 breast cancer, you have stage 2 breast cancer," but that actually only tells you how much cancer there is. Staging is about essentially size or spread to various places. And what has changed is that we now not only can tell a woman and factor this into our treatment plan, how much cancer there is, but we can also say something about what I often refer to patients when I'm speaking about this, as I describe to patients, is the personality of the cancer. So we talk about cancers that are hormonally sensitive. We talk about cancers that are so-called triple negative, where hormonal therapies don't work and other sorts of therapies have traditionally not worked as well other than chemotherapy. And then we talk about HER2-positive breast cancers, which are unique, and this is about a little bit less than 20% of all breast cancers, because these cancers have too many copies of a very specific gene in the nucleus of the cell, and that leads to a protein on the surface that, as a result of that, we can use very specific therapy for those people. And so our understanding of breast cancer has really just exploded over the past 20 years. And what started in the laboratory has been over time translated to the clinic, and we now have many, many new drugs. Do we have enough? No. Do we have all the answers? No. But I firmly believe that 10 years from now, we'll be in a place where we can tell somebody that if you can get the care that we know is best, that you will stand a minuscule chance of losing your life to breast cancer. Most of those people will be cured. A few of them will perhaps live with cancer as a chronic problem, but a chronic problem that isn't such a bad chronic problem. And that leads me, and I think it's actually a pretty nice segue into what you're going to talk about, leads me into the last piece of all of this, which is that if we stopped developing all drugs and we did nothing else in breast cancer other than make sure we could deliver the therapy we have today to everybody who needs it, we would save far more lives than we will by developing more drugs. I don't think it's an either or. So I'm not suggesting we should stop developing drugs. In fact, I spend my life doing a lot of that. That said, the number of deaths and the number of people who suffer needlessly because of either not being able to access the healthcare system, having a healthcare system that doesn't seem friendly, not getting the right follow-up from the healthcare system, not having the support services to be able to go to appointments, because when you're, you can't even figure out how you're going to pay for the babysitter, you can't even think about how you're going to spend the money to get to the clinic. So these are all the challenges we have to face, and with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to sit, so you can stand. Well, we're
Yeah.
going to just
Yes.
do this thing. That works
Yes.
really well. And by the way, once we do this, we'll answer whatever questions you have.
So hi, good morning, everybody. My name, can everybody hear me in the back? Yes, okay. So So I'm Alvaro. I am a breast medical oncologist at Hartford Healthcare, and then I am the newly appointed medical director of cancer disparities and health equity. And the reason why I stepped into that role is, and this is what I was commenting with Dr. Weiner this morning, is when I first met him, I was doing research in integrative medicine, massage therapy and acupuncture for the treatment of several side effects of chemotherapy and breast cancer. But then I was also very tempted to do research in the medical disparities that we have. And it was something that him and one of my mentors said that kind of said, you know what, Alvaro, there's something here, and start focusing your efforts on this one. And that's what I've been doing so far at Hartford Healthcare. During my first couple of years at Hartford Healthcare, when I was just a breast medical oncologist, I was still devoted to kind of minimizing disparities. And the reason being for me was, I'm originally from El Salvador, where my dad is an oncologist himself, and my mom is a psychiatrist. And for years, I thought I was going to go back, right? It was kind of just meant to be. But then I realized, because of several reasons, that I didn't want to go back, but I still wanted to give back to my population and my people, right? And so I started trying to understand ways of minimizing disparities. And just like what Dr. Weiner was saying is, we have issues with providing equitable care and equitable access to care. And so we were focusing, first of all, into how can we minimize the late diagnosis of breast cancer in the Hispanic population. So the Hispanic population genetically is less likely to be diagnosed with breast cancer, but then when we come to the United States and we adopt their diet and their culture, right? So there's that acculturation process, and then all of a sudden we are at equal, if not higher, chances of being diagnosed with breast cancer. And so for some reason we're being diagnosed with later stages, and the reason is because we just don't want to get screened. But there's a variety of reasons, right? There's access to care, right? So maybe they don't know how to get it. There's this financial fears, right? And I just can't take time off work. So we're trying to understand this. And the reason that I started focusing more on this is because for years the medical community has said the Hispanic population. But truth be told is, even within the Hispanic population, we're so different, right? So there's people from Argentina, and if you look at them, they probably look like European. And then if you look at me, I'm from El Salvador, completely different. So genetically, subculturally, belief-wise, we're all different. And then here in the United States, we need to account for the local regional differences, right? In New York, for instance, there's probably not a transportation barrier, but in Connecticut, at least in Hartford, where there's like 3 bus lines, right? So how are we going to be able to get them there, right? And so we were planning on doing this project in understanding what the perceived risks, perceived benefits, and barriers to mammograms and screening for breast cancer is in our population that we serve in central Connecticut, with hopes of replicating or creating a model that can be replicated later on, but then COVID hit. And so we lost access to all the healthy population because all the non-urgent access to care was kind of just neglected, right? And so what we decided to do is, at that point, knowing that COVID could actually widen those disparities that are already pre-existent, we decided to create a project. So we did a project looking at the perceived alterations of care, and we also looked at the specific perceptions and beliefs regarding the use of virtual medicine in our populations, right? And so that paper actually was just published at JCO last week, and it's now looking into understanding what the perception is of the Hispanic population. So I focus mostly on the Hispanic population because that's what 47% of the population we serve is Hispanic, and we wanted to just represent them. And what we realize is that there's really not a lot of differences when it comes to cultural acceptance of this. So for a lot of times we say, they're just not trusting of the medical community, but actually it is, they even have the devices to use it, but it's the lack of the application usage that they don't know, right? And so that's just an example of the things that we've realized now in the disparities and how these subcultural differences kind of play a part into it. Dr. Weiner was saying the other thing is the access of care, and that's what in my role of medical director of the cancer disparities and the health equity is we're trying to understand, number one, trying to go back now to the mammograms and understanding why they're not getting screened. And then also, we actually have a funded project going on right now looking into clinical trial enrollment barriers. Because what we've said is, and Dr. Weiner was saying this, even if we stop doing more research, right, we will still realize that there is a lot of things that we don't know, right? So we don't, for instance, we don't know what a lot of these new trials or new medications or new regimens, how they impact the underserved populations, right? We know that genetically there are people who are at increased risk of having side effects from the already developed regimens. But we don't know how to adapt that to our practice to minimize the iatrogenic effects or long-term effects on our patients. So it's kind of what we're trying to look into right now, understanding how can we increase the variability of the representation of the underserved population in the clinical trials. And then lastly is what we're trying to do is how do we transfer that into the practice, right? And there's another project that we have under ASCO, which is looking into standardizing the way that people are screened for financial toxicity. So I was in my clinic one day, and I have one of my breast cancer survivors that I treated when I first started about 4 years ago, and then she's doing amazing, and then she has osteoporosis because of a medication that we're giving her. And so I need to start her on the shot, and then she needs a dental clearance because one of the side effects that can happen is jaw issues. And so I look at her and I say, you need to get dental clearance, and she says, I don't have dental insurance. And I said, well, what kind of insurance do you have? Medicare usually provides like a yearly examination. She's like, I've been praying for private insurance for the last 18 months. And so I was ashamed to not know that about my patient, right? Because with a simple text to my social worker, she was enrolled in Medicare a week later. And so I could have saved her thousands of dollars with it. So I was ashamed of not knowing that. And I thought to myself, well, at the same time, I'm talking to her about treatment options and side effects and management of the side effects in clinical trials and participate in this clinical trial of ours. We really don't have the time. So how can we make it so that nobody gets lost through the cracks, everybody gets financially screened, right, or screened for financial toxicity, and then how do we apply that and how does that impact? So that's what I'm trying to do in my role as medical director. What we're trying to do at the same time is kind of share our experiences with the world and kind of just start the discussion about just let's try to fit everybody in the same one and let's find solutions for each one of us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The only thing you did wrong is calling me Dr.
I said the only thing he did wrong was call me Dr. Weiner. But other than that, all right.
All right, my turn.
Your turn. And don't call me Dr. Weiner.
Yes, I was actually going to do that, so thanks for the heads up. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Awesome. So my name is Francesca Menghi. I'm a research scientist at the Jackson Laboratory for Genomic Medicine. It's based in Farmington, Connecticut, so not too far from here. After these beautiful introductions to breast cancer and accessibility, I thought I will do two things in this few minutes. One is give you a little bit of an overview of my research. So the Jackson Laboratory is a NCI designated basic cancer center. It's only one of 7 such centers in the US. It's different from the Yale Cancer Center, which is clinical. Basic means that we really focus on understanding the disease and the biology, and specifically I focus on the genomics, but we do have a translational intent. So what I'm going to do, I'll give you a brief overview of my research program, and then I want to talk about a more translational initiative that is happening at the Jackson Laboratory. I'm not directly involved, but I'm so proud of it that I feel entitled to talk to you about it, and I think it'll be of interest to this audience. So as I mentioned, and as Eric mentioned, I work on triple negative breast cancer, which is, as really the name, I've always been fascinated about the definition. Triple negative is really called by what is not. It's negative. So we really don't know too much about triple negative breast cancer other than it doesn't carry the activated receptors that are present in other breast cancer subtypes and that make those cancer receptors more amenable to targeted therapies. So really, it's like a bucket of cancers that are not other things. It's a very heterogeneous disease in itself. And so years ago, roughly 10 years ago, we started to focus on triple negative breast cancer to try and understand a little bit better the biology. And I was, as a scientist, very lucky to come and work in this field at a time where the technologies were just blooming. We had next generation sequencing coming along that would allow us to look at the entire genome of a cancer in a relatively economical and fast way, as well as CRISPR-Cas9 genomic engineering technology that allow us to address some of the hypotheses we have very easily in the lab using cell models and mouse models. And so what we realized fairly quickly is that there was a subset of triple negative breast cancer patient that had very interesting genomic configurations in their genome. They carried a large number of mutations of a particular type, and we started to kind of focus on this pattern of mutation, and we identified that there was a specific mutational profile associated with it, and eventually traced it back to loss of activity of the BRCA1 gene that probably many of you have known of because it's one of the genes that most associated with heritable breast cancer. So what we assume is that that's great. We have this genomic signature, and we can now identify patients that carry this mutation, and they are probably more likely to respond to therapy, certain types of therapy, better than patients that do not carry that mutation for all the biological reasons that we've figured out. But when we tested that in clinical cohort patients, that was not the case, and so we were really puzzled, and that is often the case in research. You start with an hypothesis, completely disprove it, and then you just have to figure out, okay, what else is there? And so we start looking into differences, and the BRCA1 gene can actually be inactivated in two major ways. There could be a mutation, and that's what is transmitted through families, and that's really a change in the DNA sequence that causes that gene to not be functioning anymore. Or there could be an epigenetic event, and epigenetic events are chemicals that are bound to the DNA, but they don't change the sequence of the DNA itself. They do change how the DNA is accessed within the cells and whether it's active or not. And basically what we understood using both clinical specimen and mouse modeling and in vitro modeling is that it really mattered where that complex genomic configuration was due to mutation versus epigenetic silencing of the BRCA1 gene. And really what this all means for a triple negative breast cancer patient is that we are starting to stratify even more this group of patients into those that are BRCA1 mutant, BRCA1 silenced, and the other group. And so we're starting to kind of draw the lines a little bit more and try to optimize therapy for each patient based on the exact genomics of their tumor. This is really the promise of precision medicine. And so this kind of will link to the other initiative I really wanted to talk to you about. So that's the MCGI Main Cancer Genomic Initiative. It's been spearheaded by the JAC's clinical medical officer, Dr. Jens Reuters. And what they wanted to do is improve accessibility to advanced genomic-based therapeutic treatment in Maine. So Maine, that's where one of the major campuses of the Jackson Laboratory is based, and it's a very rural state. So a lot of the population live in rural area, and for them access to advanced genomic screening and clinical trials was really difficult. So this initiative proposed to engage the clinical oncology centers around the state, offer free genomic screenings for every cancer patient that presented at those clinics, and then offer education to the clinical oncologists that were taking care of this patient through virtual genomic tumor boards. These are virtual meetings where the oncologists would meet with scientists at the Jackson Laboratory, as well as oncologists all over the country, and in fact all over the world. There were people from Australia and the UK involved, oncologists at Duke University, at Hartford Cancer Center, and they would sit down at this virtual meeting and discuss the outcome of those genomic screening and recommend clinical trial enrollment or specific therapeutic regimen for those patients that would have otherwise had no access to this expertise therapies or disinformation. And that was incredibly successful because 100% of the oncologists in Maine have been recruited, which is pretty exceptional. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. And so that was so successful that there's now a second phase in collaboration with the Southwestern Oncology Group to expand that into a proper clinical trial that is diffusing all over the country, not just in Maine. And I think that's really a wonderful example of how cancer care and all the technologies that we are developing in the lab can be made accessible to